Oh, it's not a nerd. Decided to do the constant vlog on the main streets of Moscow. I got asked on the channel about how I learn, so I thought I'd chat a bit about that in regards to development. How do I learn? What are my methods, or what? Or just, I guess, how the natural way that I learn new things, new skills. So I tend to take experimental approach, I think. I tend to like just diving in often, especially if I'm learning like a new framework or a library. I like to just experiment at first. So I like to just see what are the possibilities of the library or the framework by just doing. Quite hands-on in that sense, I guess. And then usually I have to refer to documentation when there are things I don't understand. So there's probably disadvantages and advantages to that method. I guess the main advantage would be you get a very good broad overview of you get a quick idea of what it can do when you're prototyping, I guess, if you just dive in and start doing stuff. I guess the main disadvantage of that method is that you can miss very important bits of information. And I'm not saying this is the way you have to do it, this is just how I generally approach these things. Like, some people, I guess, would be very methodical and read the entire documentation before doing anything or touching anything. But yeah, it's a personal thing, I guess that's how I approach it. I just try things out. Once it doesn't start working, then reverse the documentation on a deep depth level, I suppose. So more broadly, like, how did I start off learning, I guess, of CSS, HTML, JavaScript? So really, similarly to how I approach like learning a new JavaScript framework or library now, it would be just by doing. So mess around, do some small projects, break lots of things until I sort of figure out what works and what doesn't. I mean, it was a long time ago I learned HTML and CSS. I was in college, so we got a very methodical, obviously, approach to learning the subjects in the academic manner. So we got taught the theory really first before we did anything, which you do need grounding in, especially for core things like tags and styles and classes and IDs and CSS and selectors and all that sort of jazz. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm not personally, and I sort of bring this to like an INTP thing as well, because I know it's pop psychology, but it's quite interesting to approach it that way. So the Myers-Briggs is a personality typing thing. I'm an INTP, and that's generally the way of approaching things, like very experimentally, I suppose. So I guess it makes sense to do things that way. So yeah, what was I going to say? Oh, there was a recent post recently from a guy, Algo guy, Clement, I can't remember his second name, but he was saying about how there's a post saying about basically the one thing they don't teach you about development skill you need to have. It's basically saying copying and pasting. And I think there is something in that, actually. He gave the example of class components, like no one memorises class components, how to write it from scratch. Well, I mean, you do memorise the core structure, like constructor, setting your initial state, render and return, of course, your export. But at first, if you're in any code base, like I said in that video, actually, basically you get associated with how things are written in that code base, and then proceed to copy paste. There's nothing wrong with that. Basically, I think the way most people learn how to code is just by looking at other people's code. with a bit of creativity as well. It's not all just copying and pasting, of course, but that is a big part of it. It's examining how things are done in an existing paradigm. Of course, there's times where you have to write your own methods, you have to write your own stuff with just JavaScript. But yeah, so I hope that's covered some of that question. There was an interesting question posed by one of my viewers on YouTube. Maybe that covers it a bit. I'm off to get a Burger King. So a few other things about how I learn. Decided to get into the COVID spirit and wear a mask. Hope it doesn't affect the audio levels too much. Probably does. I need to sound muffled. So I think people sometimes kind of think if you want to be a developer that it's necessary to go to university and go the academic route, which is what I did. I didn't really ever do that well at it. I got through, but it's not really that necessary. Really, development's a lot like it's quite creative actually. People don't really generally think of it like that, especially when you do front end stuff, because it's dealing with the visual. So a lot of it's down to experimentation, really. I mean, when I was to be honest, I learned more just doing my own thing than ever I did at college. Though it did give me a good grounding in like object-oriented programming and what a variable is and classes, what a class is, programming. So that's important too. And I think it's always important to stay in the loop with programming fundamentals, concepts of programming, core concepts of programming, and that sort of thing. It's good to read as well. One of the most undervalued things I think these days is actually buying a subject book and just taking the time to study it. Like, that's probably sort of undervalued these days with everything sort of being online and lots of code academy courses and stuff, which are great, don't get me wrong, but there's something to be said for just being able to look into a book, which usually teaches, as long as it's a good book, it's going to teach you from A to Z, the core concepts, everything else. That sort of contradicts what I said before with just get stuck in and do it, but I mean all learning is got to be multi-layered and multi-level, otherwise you've got to have complementary learning. So the doing is the fun part usually, but that can be trafficking in fraught with danger, heavy dragons and all that, but yeah, basically that's how I learn, and I've got to end this here. Get my mask back up.